Recently, I stumbled across a Forbes article about the world's most beautiful mountains. What caught my attention was that the ranking wasn't based on opinions, surveys, or votes. Instead, it was based on a new eye-tracking study that attempted to measure which mountain landscapes capture human attention the fastest and hold it the longest. The study, conducted by Irish travel insurance specialist Just Cover, analyzed mountain landscapes from around the world. Participants were shown images of each location, while eye-tracking software recorded how quickly their gaze locked onto them and how long they continued looking. The result was a global ranking of what the study claims are the world's most visually captivating mountain landscapes. Now, I definitely have some opinions about these results because in my view, this study is far from perfect. And later in the video, I'll explain exactly why. I'll also share a few mountains that I personally think deserve a place in this conversation. But first, let's take a look at what the study actually found. Before we get to the ranking itself, it's worth quickly explaining how these mountains were scored. The researchers used eye-tracking cameras and specialized software to monitor exactly where people were looking while they viewed photographs of mountain landscapes from around the world. Two things were measured. First, how quickly a person's eyes focused on a particular image, and second, how long they continued looking at it. Those measurements were then combined into a final score out of 100. The idea was simple. The more visually captivating a mountain landscape is, the faster it grabs your attention and the longer it holds it. Whether that actually makes for a fair ranking of the world's most beautiful mountains is something we'll come back to later. According to this study, mountain landscape at the number 1 spot stood far above the rest, earning an impressive score of 99.3 out of 100. But for now, let's see which mountain landscapes people simply couldn't stop looking at. Starting with number 10. Number 10 is actually a tie. With a score of 68.4, the study placed Mount Moran in Wyoming and Mount Shuksan in Washington at the same position. Mount Moran rises above Jackson Lake in Grand Teton National Park, reaching 3,844 meters or 12,610 feet. It is not the highest peak in the Tetons, but from the lake it has one of the cleanest mountain profiles in the entire range. Steep rock, visible glaciers, and a dark vertical stripe of ancient volcanic rock called the Black Dike cutting across its face. It also has a darker detail attached to it. In 1950, a passenger plane crashed into Mount Moran during bad weather, and because the wreck landed high on the mountain in extremely difficult terrain, parts of the aircraft still remain there today. Mount Shuksan is completely different. It stands in the North Cascades of Washington at 2,783 meters, or 9,131 feet, and its most famous view is from Picture Lake, where the mountain reflects almost perfectly in the water below. Sharp summit, hanging glaciers, dark forest, clean reflection. So number 10 starts with two very similar kinds of beauty. One mountain rising cold and heavy above a huge lake, and another almost perfectly framed like a postcard in the Cascades. At number 9 is a mountain that many of you have probably seen before, even if you don't recognize its name. Kirkjufell, located on Iceland's Snæfellsnes Peninsula, earned a score of 68.6, narrowly placing it ahead of the two mountains we just covered. Standing just 463 meters, or 1,519 feet tall, Kirkjufell is by far one of the smallest mountains on this list. Yet despite its modest height, it has become one of the most photographed mountains on Earth, and it's easy to see why. Unlike many famous peaks that require helicopters, expeditions, or days of hiking to appreciate, Kirkjufell rises almost directly from the coastline. From certain angles, its distinctive shape gives it the appearance of a perfectly sculpted pyramid standing alone above the surrounding landscape. The mountain became even more famous after appearing in Game of Thrones, where it was used as the Arrowhead Mountain beyond the wall. But long before television crews arrived, Kirkjufell was already attracting photographers from around the world. Part of its appeal is that it rarely appears by itself. Just across the road sits Kirkjufellsfoss, a small waterfall that creates one of the most recognizable mountain compositions anywhere on Earth. Kirkjufell may not be one of the tallest, steepest, or most remote mountains on Earth. It might be one of the most photogenic, and apparently, according to this study, people simply couldn't stop looking at it. At number 8 is a landscape that barely looks real. Located on Scotland's Isle of Skye, the Quiraing, earned a score of 72.7 in the study. And unlike most entries on this list, the Quiraing is not a single peak. It is an entire landscape of cliffs, rock towers, hidden plateaus, and steep green slopes that seem almost impossible to be natural. The landscape was created by a massive landslide thousands of years ago when part of the Trotternish Ridge began collapsing toward the sea. What's even stranger is that the process never completely stopped. Parts of the Quiraing are still moving today, forcing engineers to regularly repair sections of the nearby road as the ground slowly shifts beneath it. Scattered across the landscape are formations with names that sound like they belong in a fantasy novel. The Needle, a towering rock spire, rising from the hillside. The Prison, an isolated block of rock surrounded by steep cliffs. And the Table, a hidden grassy plateau that local farmers once used to hide livestock from cattle thieves. Add the frequent mist, rapidly changing weather, and views stretching across the sea toward the Outer Hebrides, and it's easy to understand why the Quiraing has become one of Scotland's most photographed landscapes. Because unlike many mountains that impress through height, the Quiraing stands out by looking like a place that shouldn't exist at all. At number 7 are the Dolomites in northern Italy, with a score of 74.7. And this is where the list becomes a little strange, because the Dolomites are not one mountain. They are an entire mountain range, stretching across the Italian Alps and filled with dozens of peaks that could probably compete on their own. What makes them so recognizable is the rock itself. The Dolomites are built from pale limestone and dolomite, which means their cliffs can shift color dramatically depending on the light. At sunrise and sunset, the mountains can glow pink, orange, or almost red. The phenomenon is so famous that it even has its own name, Enrosadera. But the beauty here is not just color. The Dolomites have some of the sharpest and most vertical mountain architecture in Europe. Towers like the Trecime di Lavaredo rise almost like stone walls from the surrounding valleys, while entire ridgelines break into jagged spires, cliffs, and isolated rock castles. That is probably why this region became one of the birthplaces of serious alpine climbing, and why UNESCO later recognized the Dolomites as a World Heritage Site. So even if the study ranked the Dolomites as one entry, it is almost cheating. Because this is not one beautiful mountain, it is an entire landscape of them. At number 6 are the Maroon Bells in Colorado, with a score of 75.1, and this is probably one of the easiest entries on the list to understand visually. The Maroon Bells are 2 peaks in the Elk Mountains. Maroon Peak, rising to 4,317 meters, or 14,163 feet, and North Maroon Peak, reaching 4,273 meters, or 14,019 feet. They are famous because of one specific view. 2 sharp dark red mountains reflected almost perfectly in Maroon Lake, surrounded by forest, snow, and open alpine terrain. It is one of the most photographed scenes in the United States, but the name is also a warning. The peaks are made of loose, rotten rock, and climbers sometimes call them the Deadly Bells, because the same layered sedimentary rock that makes them so beautiful also makes them unstable and dangerous. So the Maroon Bells are not just postcard mountains. They are mountains where the beauty and danger come from the same thing, fragile red rock stacked into 2 almost perfect pyramids above a still alpine lake. At number 5 is Errigal, in County Donegal, Ireland, with a score of 75.8. At just 751 meters, or 2,464 feet, it is one of the smallest mountains on this list. And yet, it managed to rank higher than many mountains several times its size. The reason is simple. Errigal has one of the most recognizable silhouettes in Ireland. Rising almost completely on its own above the surrounding landscape, it forms a sharp pyramid that can be seen from miles away. And unlike many mountains that look impressive only from a specific viewpoint, Errigal seems to change character depending on where you're standing. From one direction, it appears almost perfectly symmetrical. From another, it looks like a jagged wall of rock rising above the hills of Donegal. The mountain is especially famous at sunrise and sunset, when its pale slopes can take on a pink or golden glow, making it one of the most photographed peaks in the country. In fact, it has even been voted Ireland's most iconic mountain. Very few mountains have a silhouette as instantly recognizable as Errigal's. At number 4 is Slieve in County Donegal, Ireland, with a score of 82.9, And unlike most locations on this list, Slieve is famous less for its summit and more for what lies beneath it. The mountain rises directly from the Atlantic Ocean, forming some of the highest sea cliffs in Europe. At their highest point, the cliffs reach 601 meters, or 1,972 feet, making them nearly 3 times taller than Ireland's famous cliffs of Moher. Yet, outside Ireland, surprisingly few people have ever heard of them. What makes the landscape so memorable is the contrast. On one side, rolling green slopes and grazing sheep. On the other, a sheer drop toward the Atlantic hundreds of meters below. One of the most famous sections is known as One Man's Pass, a narrow ridge where steep slopes fall away on both sides. While thousands of visitors come here every year, it remains one of the most intimidating viewpoints in Ireland. And because the cliffs face the open Atlantic, the scenery is constantly changing. One day, the ocean is calm and the visibility seems endless. The next, clouds and sea mist can swallow entire sections of the mountain. It's the kind of landscape that feels oversized for Ireland, and perhaps that's why it scored so highly in the study. At number 3 are the Torres del Paine in southern Chile with a score of 83.2. And unlike most mountains on this list, the Torres are not famous because of their height. They are famous because of their shape. Rising above the Patagonian wilderness, the 3 granite towers reach heights of up to 2,500 meters, or 8,200 feet, appearing almost as if they were carved from a single block of stone. For millions of years, glaciers slowly stripped away the softer rock surrounding them, leaving behind the vertical granite spires we see today. The result is one of the most recognizable mountain silhouettes anywhere on Earth. What makes the scenery even more dramatic is the setting. The towers rise above turquoise lakes, glaciers, and some of the most powerful winds on the planet. Gusts exceeding 100 kilometers per hour, or 60 miles per hour, are common here, helping create the constantly changing skies that Patagonia is famous for. And because weather moves so quickly through the region, the Torres rarely look the same twice. One moment they are hidden behind clouds. The next, sunlight breaks through and illuminates the entire face of the towers. It's the kind of landscape that almost looks designed for photography, which is probably why it ended up so close to the top of this ranking. At number 2 is El Capitan in California's Yosemite National Park with a score of 84.9. And this might be the most surprising mountain on the entire list, because technically, El Capitan isn't even a mountain. It is a granite monolith rising from the floor of Yosemite Valley, reaching an elevation of 2,308 meters, or 7,573 feet above sea level. What makes it famous is its vertical face. From the valley floor, El Capitan rises more than 900 meters, or 3,000 feet, almost uninterrupted, creating one of the largest exposed granite walls on Earth. The scale is difficult to appreciate until you spot climbers on the wall. Tiny colored dots moving across a cliff so large that some climbing routes require several days to complete. For decades, El Capitan has been one of the ultimate tests in rock climbing. And in 2017, it became world famous when Alex Honnold completed the first free solo ascent, climbing the wall alone without ropes or safety equipment. But even for people with no interest in climbing, there is something instantly captivating about the mountain. Unlike jagged peaks or snowy summits, El Capitan is almost absurdly simple. Just an enormous wall of stone rising straight out of the valley. And sometimes simplicity is enough, because according to this study, only one mountain landscape on Earth managed to hold people's attention longer. At number 1 are the Canadian Rockies, with a score of 99.3. And what immediately stands out is the gap. The second place finisher, El Capitan, scored 84.9, meaning the Canadian Rockies didn't just take first place, they finished more than 14 points ahead of the rest of the competition. And perhaps fittingly, the winner is not a single mountain, but one of the most famous mountain regions on Earth. Stretching across Western Canada, the Rockies contain thousands of peaks spread across a landscape larger than many countries. What makes the region so recognizable are its lakes. Places like Moran Lake and Lake Louise have become world famous for their almost unreal turquoise color, created by fine rock particles carried into the water by glaciers. Combined with the surrounding peaks, the result is some of the most photographed mountain scenery on the planet. And unlike many locations on this list that rely on a single iconic viewpoint, the Canadian Rockies seem to produce postcard-worthy landscapes in every direction. According to this study, that was enough to make them the most visually captivating mountain landscape on Earth. But now comes the part where things start to fall apart. Because while the ranking itself is fascinating, I'm not convinced it actually tells us which mountains are the most beautiful. Now let's consider all the things wrong with this study. The first problem is the number of mountains that were actually included. The researchers looked at just 56 mountain landscapes. 56? There are hundreds of thousands of mountains on Earth, yet somehow this study is supposed to tell us which ones are the most beautiful. Then there is the sample size. The entire ranking is based on just 100 participants. That's not a meaningful sample when you're trying to make a claim about something as subjective as beauty. The study was also conducted by an Irish travel insurance company, which makes the results even more questionable. Maybe it's just a coincidence, but Ireland somehow ended up with 2 entries in the top 5. And then there is the issue of what is actually being ranked. Some entries are individual mountains, while others are entire mountain ranges containing hundreds or even thousands of peaks. The Canadian Rockies won the study, but comparing a massive mountain region to a single mountain like Kirkjufell doesn't make much sense. But the biggest problem are the photographs. This wasn't really a study of the world's most beautiful mountains. It was a study of which photographs held people's attention the longest. Change the weather, change the season, change the angle, or simply use a better photographer, and the results could look completely different. Eye tracking can tell you which images people look at. It cannot tell you which mountains are the most beautiful on Earth. But that doesn't stop publications like Forbes from running headlines such as, "These are the world's most beautiful mountains," according to new eye tracking study. Personally, I think that's a pretty ridiculous conclusion to draw from a study like this. So if this study doesn't really tell us which mountains are the most beautiful, what would a better list look like? The truth is that no ranking could ever be completely objective. Beauty is one of those things that is almost impossible to measure. Ask a climber, a photographer, a geologist, or someone who grew up in the shadow of a mountain, and you're likely to get 4 completely different answers. But after making dozens of videos about mountains and spending far more time thinking about them than any normal person probably should, I feel qualified enough to call myself a self-proclaimed mountain expert. And while I don't think anyone can definitively name the most beautiful mountain on Earth, there are certain peaks that seem to appear again and again whenever that conversation comes up. Mountains that have inspired books, paintings, photographs, documentaries, expeditions, and entire generations of climbers. So, rather than looking at what an eye-tracking study thinks, I wanted to highlight 5 mountains that, in my opinion, have some of the strongest claims to the title of the most beautiful mountain on Earth, with the last being my winner. And we're starting with a mountain whose silhouette has become one of the most recognizable on the planet. This is the Matterhorn, standing 4,478 meters or 14,692 feet above sea level. It straddles the border between Switzerland and Italy, towering above the famous mountain village of Zermatt. Its shape is almost unnatural, a near-symmetrical pyramid, with 4 sharp ridges and steep faces, rising straight out of the valley with no foothills to soften the view. John Ruskin called it the most noble cliff in Europe. Others have described it simply as a frozen blade. The Matterhorn silhouette is so distinctive it's been used for over a century as the logo of Toblerone chocolate, and more recently as the basis for Disneyland's first mountain-themed ride. What most people don't realize is that the Matterhorn was once thought to be unclimbable. Before 1865, dozens of attempts had failed, some dramatically, leading to widespread belief that its summit might be unreachable. That changed with Edward Whymper's ascent, which made headlines across Europe, but even that success ended in tragedy. 4 of Whymper's teammates died during the descent when their rope snapped, a story that added to the mountain's mystique and continues to haunt its climbing history. But its visual power isn't just about shape. The Matterhorn rises over 3,000 vertical meters, or nearly 10,000 feet above the surrounding terrain. In morning light, it casts a shadow that can stretch 20 kilometers across the glacier basin. Its isolation and symmetry make it a favorite subject for landscape photographers. In winter, cloud inversions often wrap around the base, while the summit floats above in full sun, a visual effect that looks unreal even in person. It also holds a darker record. Since its first ascent in 1865, over 500 climbers have died on its slopes, not because of extreme difficulty, but because of how often it's attempted. Fatalities are often caused by loose rock, sudden weather shifts, or exhaustion after late starts. And yet, that danger only adds to its allure. As alpinist Gaston Rebuffat once said, "In the Alps, all roads lead to the Matterhorn. It's the final goal, the dream, the test. No mountain on this list is more instantly recognizable. And for many, no mountain is more beautiful." The next mountain proves that beauty and intimidation can go hand in hand. This is K2. It rises to 8,611 meters, or 28,251 feet, making it the second highest mountain on Earth. But many climbers and photographers agree, it might be the most beautiful. Unlike Everest, K2 is not hidden in a sea of neighboring peaks. It stands tall and alone, a near-perfect triangle of rock and ice rising from the Baltoro Glacier in northern Pakistan. Its profile is iconic. Steep, angular ridges, uninterrupted from base to summit, giving the appearance of a giant stone pyramid balanced on its point. No terraces, no false peaks, no soft edges. American photographer Galen Rowell once called K2 the most beautiful mountain in the world, and Reinhold Messner, the first man to climb all 14 8,000ers, said it was the mountain of mountains, not because it's the highest, but because it looks exactly like what a mountain is supposed to be. The name itself reflects that rawness. It was labeled K2 during the 1856 Great Trigonometrical Survey of India because it was the second peak catalogued in the Karakoram Range. It has no deep mythological name, no romantic etymology, just a code which somehow fits. The Balti people call it Chagori, meaning Great Mountain, but even locally, K2 has stuck. Its isolation enhances the impact. It rises over 3,000 meters, nearly 10,000 feet above the glacier at its base, with no gentle slopes to interrupt the rise. Seen from Concordia or the Godwin-Austen Glacier, it appears suddenly and completely dominating the sky. But the mountain's beauty also carries weight. K2 is infamous for its difficulty. Its summit has one of the highest fatality rates among 8,000-meter peaks. Not because it's impossible, but because it's unforgiving. Still, people return, not for the record, but for the view. Even among climbers who've summited Everest, many say K2 is the one that stayed in their minds. Both terrifying and stunning. Every ridge, every shadow, every fracture of ice seems sharpened, as if nature carved it with intention. It's one of the most dangerous mountains in the world, and for many, the most beautiful. For my number 3, I picked a mountain that needs no introduction among climbers. Dablam stands alone, with steep ridges that drop off on all sides, a pointed summit, and hanging glaciers that drape off its flanks like frozen jewelry. The name means mother's necklace in Sherpa. Local legend says the ridges represent a mother's arms, and the hanging glacier is the Dablam, a traditional pendant worn by Sherpa women. It's one of the few major mountains whose name is entirely based on its appearance. For many trekkers heading to Everest Base Camp, Dablam is the first mountain that stops them in their tracks. It dominates the skyline above the trail for days. From every angle, it reveals a different outline, but always the same, impossible sharpness. The first ascent was made in 1961 by a team of New Zealand, American, and British climbers, including Barry Bishop and Mike Gill. Since then, it's become a popular objective among experienced mountaineers, though still technically challenging and dangerous, especially because of seracs and avalanche risk. It's also one of the most photographed peaks in Asia. National Geographic has featured it multiple times, and climbers, even those heading to 8,000ers, often say Dablam is the one they remember most. There are taller peaks, there are harder climbs, but in terms of presence, Dablam often overshadows them all. For my number 2, I couldn't choose between two neighboring peaks, both of which have become icons of the mountaineering world. They rise from the southern Patagonian icefield, along the border between Argentina and Chile, in one of the most remote and weather-exposed mountain regions in the world. Cerro Torre stands at 3,128 meters, or 10,262 feet. Fitzroy is taller, at 3,405 meters, or 11,171 feet above sea level, but their global recognition has nothing to do with altitude. Torre is shaped like a vertical spear. Its narrow summit is often crowned by a massive rime cap, frozen mist layered into wind-sculpted formations. Fitzroy is heavier and more serrated. Its main face rises nearly 2,000 vertical meters from base to summit, a wall of pink granite flanked by smaller towers. Both peaks rise directly above the Patagonian steppe. There are no foothills to soften the skyline, just flat plains and then sudden vertical stone. From the nearby town of El Chalten, Fitzroy dominates the horizon. Its outline became the logo of the Patagonia clothing brand, one of few commercial logos based on a real mountain. Cerro Torre, by contrast, is often hidden. Even standing nearby, you might wait days without seeing it, but when it appears, jagged, symmetrical, and covered in wind-formed ice, it doesn't look like anything else on Earth. At sunrise, the peaks catch first light while the valleys remain in shadow. Yvon Chouinard, founder of Patagonia and an early climber in the region, once said, "Fitzroy is the most beautiful mountain I've ever seen. If I could be buried under one, that would be it." Both peaks have complex climbing histories, but most visitors come for the views. On clear days, their outlines are unmistakable, and their setting, unlike anywhere else on Earth. And finally, my number one pick is a mountain that has perhaps the strongest claim to this title. In fact, it was once voted the most beautiful mountain in the world. This is Alpamayo. It rises to 5,947 meters, or 19,511 feet above sea level in the northern Peru. Surrounded by glaciers, turquoise lakes, and steep granite walls, it's often called the most beautiful mountain in the world. That title isn't just opinion. In 1966, a German photography and climbing magazine ran an international survey among climbers and photographers. Out of all the submissions, Alpamayo was voted number one. And ever since, it's carried that reputation, not as the highest or most famous, but as the most visually perfect. Its western face is what made it famous. Seen from nearby ridgelines, the mountain appears as a flawless, steep pyramid, with icy flutes cascading down from the summit like frozen drapery. Each line is symmetrical, each angle sharp, and the entire face shines white against the deep blue sky of the high Andes. It's not visible from any major road. Reaching a clear view of Alpamayo takes days of trekking through the Santa Cruz Valley, crossing passes and weaving through high-altitude grasslands. That isolation makes the moment more powerful. You don't stumble across Alpamayo, you earn it. Climbers first summited it in 1957 via a long glacial route on the northern side, but the iconic west face wasn't climbed until 1975, when Italian alpinists scaled the fluted ice to the summit in a route that's now considered a classic. Even today, it's one of the most photographed mountains in the southern hemisphere. National Geographic, Lonely Planet, and countless outdoor publications have used its image on covers. And for those who've seen it in person, even from a distance, the symmetry is unforgettable. There are harder mountains, there are higher ones, but few, if any, look as close to perfection as Alpamayo. So after looking at the study, I think it's fair to say that ranking the world's most beautiful mountains is a lot more complicated than simply tracking where people look. Beauty is not something that can be reduced to a score out of 100, because the world's most beautiful mountain depends entirely on who is looking at it. So now I'm curious, which mountain would be your number one?